The air inside the auditorium felt electric, the kind of silence that hums louder than sound itself. Cameras flickered like nervous lightning. 1,000 young faces leaned forward as the announcement rolled across the stage speakers. Please welcome Representative Jasmine Crockett, invited by Senator Mitt Romney to deliver our keynote address. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some clapped out of instinct, others froze in disbelief. Phones lifted instantly, live streams booting up, captions already framing it as history in motion. From the front row, Romney rose, his posture calm, but his eyes searching. Across the aisle, Crockett appeared, poised, deliberate, walking the thin line between grace and defiance. Each step echoed with the weight of expectation. Reporters whispered. Partisans shifted uneasily. The stage lights hit her face, calm, unflinching, unreadable. She reached the podium, rested her hands on its edge, and looked out at the sea of uncertainty before her. Then Romney's voice broke the tension. Sometimes leadership isn't about agreement, he said slowly, every syllable carrying across the hall. It's about respect. A murmur swept through the room, soft, stunned, suspended. But what Jasmine said next didn't just earn respect. It broke it open in the hours leading up to the summit. The headlines had already chosen sides. Romney reaches across the aisle, or just reaches for relevance, blared one. Another sneered, Crockett cashes in on bipartisan spectacle. On social media, cynicism moved faster than fact. Hashtags like hashtag political theater and hashtag virtuoptics climbed the charts before a single word was spoken. For months, Washington had been a war of microphones. Every speech a soundbite, every truth a weapon. The idea of two political opposites sharing a stage without a fight felt impossible, almost naive. And that was exactly why this moment mattered. Romney, the quiet moderate in a party that had forgotten moderation, stood to lose credibility among those who thrived on outrage. Crockett, the unapologetic firebrand who'd made a name dismantling hypocrisy on live television, risked being branded as a sellout the second she shook his hand. Both entered that hall with everything to prove and everything to lose. The audience reflected America's crossroads. Students, activists, and dreamers packed shoulder to shoulder, hungry for something real. They weren't cheering for sides anymore. They were searching for sincerity. Romney took the podium first. His tone was steady, worn with humility. We may not share every view, he said, pausing as murmurs drifted through the crowd. But we share this nation, and she reminds us why that still matters. Crockett's name echoed across the room. Applause broke through hesitation, a hesitant wave turning into a tide. Cameras tilted toward her as she rose, her expression composed but unreadable. She stepped forward slowly, not as a politician seeking approval, but as a woman stepping into history's harsh light. The crowd's energy shifted, that fragile balance between disbelief and hope. Phones lifted, hearts pounded. Somewhere in the balcony, a young student whispered, "This feels different." And it did. Crockett placed her notes on the podium, took a breath that seemed to hold the room in place, and lifted her eyes toward the audience, and then to Romney. The air stilled again. Yet before she began her story, no one in that room could imagine how personal and how painful her truth would be. The story of that night didn't begin with applause. It began years earlier, in a city that had forgotten how to listen. Politics had become performance, truth a marketing strategy. The new American pastime wasn't debate, it was disdain. And if there was a villain to name, it wasn't a person. It was the culture that made arrogance fashionable and humility extinct. Mitt Romney had spent decades inside that machine. The son of a governor, the architect of calm under pressure, he'd been called everything from the last adult in the room to a relic of politeness. His was a brand of leadership built on discipline and restraint, qualities the modern arena often mistook for weakness. He carried the scars of compromise, votes misunderstood, alliances broken, ideals diluted by party survival. Then came Jasmine Crockett, a force forged in fire. She rose not from legacy, but from necessity. Her voice, sharp with conviction, cut through the noise of committees like a blade. When others rehearsed civility, she rehearsed truth. She didn't whisper into microphones, she detonated them. To some, she was reckless. To others, she was the antidote to decades of polite deceit. Cable news thrived on their contrast. Split-screen montages painted them as America's two moral archetypes. Romney, the measured statesman in Navy suits, preaching civility during hearings. "Let us remember decorum," he'd say as tempers flared. Crockett, the unapologetic firebrand, staring down condescension in committee rooms. "I'm not here to make anyone comfortable. I'm here to make them accountable." The commentators fed on it. Romney believes in order, one pundit smirked. Crockett believes in confrontation. They're polar opposites of leadership, another declared, as the cheering beneath read dignity versus defiance. And maybe they were, until you look closer. Behind closed doors, their realities were quieter, heavier. Romney often stayed late in his Senate office, reviewing letters from young voters who'd lost faith in democracy. One read, "I used to think voting mattered, but now it feels like we're just cheering for teams that hate each other." He held that letter longer than most, folding it carefully before slipping it into his briefcase. Across the country, in a modest Texas office, Crockett sat surrounded by exhausted interns and restless teenagers. She mentored them after hours, kids who saw politics as a closed door. "You don't need permission to be powerful," she told them. "You just need to care enough not to quit." When the room emptied, she'd stare out the window, her reflection lit by street lamps and doubt. "But maybe caring is the hardest part," she whispered once to herself. Different worlds, same ache. Romney fought to keep the system civil. Crockett fought to keep it honest. Both fought an invisible adversary, the apathy that fed division, the pride that silenced listening. The machine they served didn't reward grace or empathy. It rewarded spectacle. Every thoughtful pause became weakness. Every flash of compassion, a liability. The villain was never each other. It was the unseen addiction to outrage, the one that made Americans believe respect was surrender. Yet even from opposite ends of the battlefield, both began to sense the same fatigue settling over the nation. They could feel it in the tired eyes of reporters, in the robotic applause of crowds, in the emptiness behind trending hashtags. The question neither dared to voice was the same. What if we're all losing to the same enemy? And so, when fate placed them on the same stage at the Young Leaders Summit, it wasn't coincidence. It was inevitability. Two symbols of contrast walking toward the same truth. The old guard and the new fire. Tradition and rebellion. Decorum and defiance. But when these two worlds collided on that stage, pride had no script for what came next. Before she became a headline, Jasmine Crockett was just a girl in Dallas who learned early that fairness was something you had to fight for. Her mother worked double shifts, teacher by day, caregiver by night, always coming home with stories that sounded like small revolutions. "They told me to wait my turn," she'd sigh, unlacing her shoes. "But justice doesn't wait, baby. It walks." Those words stayed with Jasmine like a heartbeat. Their home was small, but it pulsed with purpose. Saturdays were for church, Sundays for arguments about right and wrong. The television flickered with politicians talking about the people. Jasmine looked around their two-bedroom apartment and wondered which people they meant. She watched her mother fill out forms no one read, appeal decisions no one reversed, and still rise before dawn with unbroken faith in the system that rarely returned the favor. That faith became Jasmine's rebellion. She didn't dream of power. She dreamed of protection. Law school was her act of resistance, a way to armor herself and others. Where her classmates chased clerkships at white shoe firms, she chose the local legal aid office. Her first client was a grandmother facing eviction. Jasmine fought and won, but what she remembered wasn't victory. It was the woman's trembling whisper, "You made them see me." Years later, she carried that same fire into Congress. Her first viral moment wasn't planned. A colleague dismissed her mid-sentence, smirking as if her voice didn't belong in the room. She didn't shout. She cut through the air with surgical calm. You don't have to raise your voice to raise a standard. Cameras captured it. Within hours, millions watched, cheering a woman who refused to bend. But virality came with venom. Commentators called her too emotional, too bold, too much. Each insult chipped away at her private certainty. In quiet moments, she'd stare at her reflection, asking the question that haunted every idealist eventually. Does truth even change minds anymore? When Romney's invitation arrived, she hesitated. It felt like walking into enemy territory, a stage built by people who'd often mocked her tone and her truth. Yet something about the invitation lingered. Maybe it was the exhaustion of always being the lightning rod. Maybe it was the memory of her mother, who never stopped believing dialogue could still matter. If the next generation doesn't see us talk to each other, Jasmine finally said to her team, they'll never learn how. Still, fear crept in, not of hostility, but of expectation. She knew how the internet worked. They want fireworks, not reflection. They'll expect me to go viral, she murmured, half to herself. Not to go vulnerable. The night before the summit, she sat alone in her hotel room, reviewing her speech. She crossed out half of it. The talking points felt hollow, polished words that didn't match her pulse. She replaced them with stories, her mother's unpaid battles, her community's quiet victories, her own doubt. The version she kept wasn't perfect. It was human. And when dawn broke, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Peace. The kind that comes when you stop performing and start telling the truth, no matter who's listening. As she stepped onto that stage, the roar of the crowd faded into a heartbeat. Her notes trembled in her hand. Romney met Hirsch, come, encouraging, unsure. She took one slow breath, steady and full of memory. She didn't know it yet, but in minutes, her vulnerability would make history. I know what you're thinking, Jasmine began, her voice steady but soft, letting the weight of each syllable fill the cavernous hall. This feels strange. A pause, not for effect, but for honesty. It should. Growth always does. A few polite claps echoed from the back, hesitant and uncertain. Others remained still, arms folded, eyes skeptical. Phones lifted to record. From the front row, Romney nodded, a faint smile crossing his face, not of agreement, but of quiet respect for her courage to step into the storm. Jasmine looked across the sea of faces, some curious, some defensive. We talk about unity like it's a performance, she said, her tone tightening. We hashtag it, we sell it, we campaign on it. But the moment someone different walks onto our stage, we shrink. A ripple ran through the room. A young attendee in the second row whispered to a friend, "She's not holding back." Jasmine leaned closer to the microphone. We can't fix a country we refuse to listen to. The line struck like a chord, raw, ringing. An older senator near the aisle shifted in his seat, glancing toward Romney with visible discomfort. A reporter in the press section muttered, "She's going off script." Cameras zoomed closer. Crockett's expression hardened, but her voice softened. Not anger, but ache. "I didn't come here to prove anyone wrong," she continued. "I came here to remember what right used to feel like." The applause was louder this time, scattered but sincere. She pressed forward, pacing the edge between defiance and vulnerability. "Young people didn't come here to watch politicians trade rehearse lines," she said. "They came here to see if honesty can still survive under these lights." Her tone built rhythm, conviction rising from the floor to the rafters. "I'm not here as a Democrat or a headline. I'm here as someone who's tired of watching hope get priced out of politics." The room tightened with silence again. Every camera was locked on her face, every heart caught between resistance and revelation. And then, just as the tension peaked, when the next word felt like it might fracture the room, she dropped a story that froze the entire crowd. The silence before she spoke again was thick enough to touch, the kind that presses against your ribs, forcing you to feel every second. Jasmine Crockett steadied herself at the podium, one hand gripping its edge like it was the only thing holding her to earth. "When I first ran for office," she began quietly, "there was a boy in my district, 12 years old. His name was Devin." Her eyes lifted toward the balcony. as if she could still see him there. He was the kind of kid who'd stay after school to help clean up, who'd fix your phone if it broke, who talked about becoming an engineer so he could make things that keep people safe. The crowd listened, breaths held. Cameras stopped clicking. Reporters froze their pens midair. Her voice softened. One night, walking home, Devin was caught between two people arguing. He never made it back. A single gasp broke the silence. Then nothing, just the low hum of air conditioning and a sound that might have been someone quietly crying in the back row. Jasmine looked down, blinked once, and steadied her voice. He didn't care about red or blue, she said, each word deliberate. He just wanted a chance to be. Her throat caught on the last syllable. She paused, and for a moment, all anyone could hear was breathing. Hundreds of people inhaling and exhaling together, as if afraid to disturb what hung in the air. Even Mitt Romney, the stoic veteran of politics, lowered his gaze. Jasmine took a breath, her voice trembling but sure. We talk about freedom, opportunity, safety. But tell me, what good are any of those words if a child like Devin never gets to grow old enough to use them? Even Mitt Romney, the stoic veteran of politics, lowered his gaze. Jasmine took a breath, her voice trembling but sure. We talk about freedom, opportunity, safety. But tell me, what good are any of those words if a child like Devin never gets to grow old enough to use them? The auditorium fell utterly silent. The echo of her words seemed to linger long after her lips stopped moving. Then she lifted her head again, strength returning like a tide. If our politics can't protect the next generation's hope, she said, then what are we even leading for? It was no longer a speech. It was confession, prayer, and challenge in one. From a media pit, a journalist whispered, "She's rewriting the room." Tears streaked down faces, not partisan tears, not performative, just human ones. The cynicism that had filled the hall minutes ago dissolved into something raw and unguarded. Jasmine stepped away from the podium for a moment, hands open. "I don't care if you're from Utah or Texas," she said. "I don't care what party you check on a ballot. Every parent, every teacher, every leader here knows what it feels like to lose something that should have been protected." Her eyes swept across the audience. Young activists, seasoned senators, staffers, skeptics. And if we can't stand together for the simple truth that every child deserves a tomorrow, she said, then maybe we've all forgotten what service means. The words landed like thunder, wrapped in grace. Romney slowly rose to his feet. For a moment, he didn't clap. He simply stood, eyes glistening, hand over his chest. Then came the first clap, one, then two, until the room erupted in sound. The crowd was on its feet. Some shouted her name. Others simply stood in stunned reverence. Phones shook as people tried to capture the moment. The wave of applause, the tears, the unity that seemed to rise from nowhere. On social media, hashtags began to flood timelines. Hashtag Crockett speech. Hashtag hope over hate. Hashtag Devin deserved more. Within minutes, her words were being replayed, remixed, quoted like scripture. Jasmine waited for the roar to quiet just enough to whisper one final line, a sentence that would echo far beyond the summit. We don't need to agree to be kind. We just need to remember that every argument should still make room for a heartbeat. It was the mic drop heard around the world. Thunderous applause shook the hall. Even security guards were clapping. Reporters forgot to tweet. And just when it seemed the moment had reached its end, Romney stepped forward, motioning for the microphone. The crowd stilled again. Cameras swung to capture him. He looked at Jasmine, eyes wet, voice unsteady. And that's when it happened. The true shock came after the speech, when Romney took the microphone again. Romney stood at the podium, his hand gripping the microphone like it carried the weight of an entire generation's expectation. The applause was still rolling through the hall, but his voice, low, shaken, sincere, cut through it like a confession. "I invited her to speak to challenge perspectives," he said, pausing as his throat tightened. "She ended up challenging mine." The crowd erupted. It wasn't just applause now, it was catharsis. People who had entered the room, divided, were suddenly unified in sound. The energy ricocheted off the walls, raw and unfiltered. Behind him, Jasmine bowed her head slightly, her face wet but steady. It was the first time anyone had seen Mitt Romney and Jasmine Crockett share a moment that wasn't about politics. It was about humanity. Within minutes, clips flooded the internet. CNN broke in with the headline, "A rare moment of moral clarity in Washington." MSNBC replayed her quote on loop. Even Fox commentators, cautious but compelled, admitted you could feel something shift in that room. TikTok transformed the moment into a symphony. Edits showed Crockett's tearful pause synced to slow orchestral swells, text overlaid. This is what leadership looks like. Teenagers and young voters stitched the clip with their own reactions. Wide eyes, trembling voices, captions reading, "I've never seen politics feel human before." Comment threads became confessionals. "I came to mock this. I left crying. She didn't just speak, she healed. If this is the future of leadership, count me in." A viral tweet hit 2 million likes overnight. Jasmine Crockett didn't go viral, she went vital. Inside the hall, the press pool was stunned into silence before rushing to file their stories. A senior reporter whispered in her phone, "We just witnessed a realignment, not of parties, but of hearts." Meanwhile, young attendees lingered, reluctant to leave. Some hugged strangers. Others sat in the aisles, faces streaked with tears, trying to process what they'd just seen. A group of student leaders from across states gathered near the back, one of them whispering, this is what we've been waiting for." Not talking points. Truth. Romney and Crockett stood side by side, their silhouettes framed by the stage lights, an image that would be replayed for weeks. Outside, news crews crowded the exits. The night sky was electric with conversation. Commentators called it the speech that melted cynicism. But as the cameras faded and the cheers settled, Jasmine Crockett stepped aside for one last interview. Her expression soft, almost unreadable. The reporter leaned in. "Congresswoman, after everything tonight, what do you think this moment means?" She smiled faintly, eyes distant, thoughtful. And yet, what Jasmine said in her final interview that night proved this wasn't just about emotion. It was about evolution. The studio lights were softer now. No roaring crowd. No flashing cameras. Just a quiet space where words could breathe. Jasmine Crockett sat across from the host. Posture calm. Eyes still shimmering from the night's emotion. "How did it feel?" the host asked gently. "To move an entire room to tears." She exhaled, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "It wasn't me," she said. "It was truth, and truth still works." Silence hung for a beat. The kind of silence that feels sacred. The camera lingered on her face. Not the viral firebrand from the internet, but a woman who just carried the weight of a nation's exhaustion and turned it into grace. Narration slipped in over soft piano chords. "Leadership isn't about echoing your side," it said. "It's about echoing humanity." Cut to Romney leaving the hall through a side door. Unguarded, his tie loosened, his eyes distant. The look of a man who just remembered why he entered public service. Cut to Crockett in the lobby, surrounded by young people, students, interns, first-time voters. She hugged them one by one, whispering something that made them laugh through their tears. Maybe leadership doesn't live in microphones or headlines, the narration continued. Maybe it lives in moments like this, quiet, unseen, but eternal. A montage unfolded. A young attendee tweeting, "She made me believe again." A teacher replaying her speech for a classroom of students the next morning. A small-town mayor quoting her words at a local council meeting. Her message was no longer just a soundbite. It was an echo traveling through the country, reshaping the rhythm of what politics could sound like. In a country built on debate, the voiceover whispered, maybe the next revolution isn't louder voices, it's gentler hearts. Crockett's voice returned, faint but firm. Empathy isn't weakness. It's wisdom. And it's time we started leading like we believe that. The camera widened, a long shot of the empty stage, lights dimming, flags swaying softly in the background. Dignity still inspires. The narration closed. Empathy is strength. Real leaders build bridges, not walls. Outside, the night air was cool, the city quiet. Somewhere, a phone buzzed with a new notification, another person sharing her speech, another ripple in the current of something awakening. And as the lights dimmed that night, one truth lingered. America had just witnessed something we'd nearly forgotten. Unity in a time when division trends faster than hope. Jasmine Crockett reminded us that courage doesn't shout, it shows up. She didn't come to win an argument. She came to remind us what humanity sounds like when it takes a microphone. If you believe leadership still begins with listening, share this moment. Subscribe and stand with the movement, proving that empathy isn't weakness, it's the foundation of everything worth saving. Because when dignity speaks, even politics goes silent. Fade out. Crockett's calm face in the glow of stage lights, applause echoing into history.